Let's look at this story now. So South Africa's grade 4 learners' comprehension skills have declined. The country coming last among 57 countries that were assessed for reading achievement in the Progress in International Reading Literacy study, PIRLS, which was released yesterday. Over 12,000 grade 4 learners in 321 schools and over 9,000 grade 6 learners in 253 schools wrote the PIRLS 2021 assessment. The international assessment has been conducted every 5 years since 2001. Now, the PIRLS study is recognized as the global standard for assessing trends in reading achievement to measure learners' reading for understanding in their 4th year of schooling, which is regarded an important transition point in their learning development. To discuss this further, we're now joined by Thandi Chaane, who is the Director of TsaRona Investment. She's also Chair of Mieta, an NGO in SADC that improves the lives of children. She was also the National Director of READ that taught reading and introduced libraries in schools. Thandi, good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I mean, your response and I suppose a reaction when you saw the results of that PIRLS study that essentially tells us that 10-year-olds, 8 out of 10 of them are struggling to read, to comprehend. What did you think when you heard that?
Good morning, Naledi, and good morning to your viewers. The disappointment I had is hurting deeply because we've got worse than we were. Prior COVID, we're already at the lower level of the 70%. We now have gone to 90%. And that shows that the country is in trouble. Because when young people cannot read at grade 4 level, and we're starting too late. The first 3 years are the breakthrough of understanding reading for any little person that is starting to learn. Because reading is basically a skill of learning. When you don't have the basic art of reading, you actually cannot learn. And if you are almost judging at grade 4, it is the crisis of the country. And we should be taking it as seriously as possible. It is actually not an issue of the teachers, because teachers have to be taught how to teach reading. It's not an automatic that simply because you're a teacher, you actually can teach the art of reading. When I used to run a program called READ, we used to take groups of teachers, teach them how to read, stimulate their own interest in reading, and therefore they would stimulate the children in the classroom. So we really have not started. We are in a bad shape as a country. We can't look at matric results and this is affecting the lowest quintile of our children, where the majority of our children are sitting. I don't want even to touch what rural children are experiencing.
Yeah, I wonder, and you touch a little bit on how teachers obviously need to be taught how to teach, right? And I think that's an important part to get to the root of the problem here. But what other factors are at play? I mean, do we have the resources within our Department of Education at this point, in your view, to really start to turn this situation around?
No, Naledi, we're not even at the point. The department is struggling with just classrooms, with just making sure. We still are talking about whether the children have toilets that are running in schools. If you look at the multiple challenges that the department faces, we need an intervention at this stage because we're in a crisis that comes from external. I'm calling on private sector. We can collect books, actually. There's resources books. If a number of us are sitting with books in our homes, a number of companies can call on their employees a book a month. We can begin to drive a box to a school that would give resources to each of our schools as a starting point. It means it's a campaign, it's a country's responsibility. We can't leave it. The department has a responsibility to supply libraries, but you can't leave it only to the department. This is an indictment on us as a society, because a reading society implies a reading culture to children. Are we ourselves showing our children as an example that we have a reading culture? What I see is that, and I'm not saying there's something wrong with technology. In actual fact, people sit on their cell phone. You know, the turning of a book is the love of reading. We need to go back to basics.
Yeah, I'm just looking at these results. If you really go into the details of it, 81% of grade 4 learners are unable to read for meaning. That's a massive number. And you talk about that culture of reading. Of course, in South Africa, there's been that big discussion around what role language plays in all of this. But the study's saying that this 81% is struggling to read for meaning, regardless of what language they're reading in. So how much of a role does language play in your view? And perhaps if we introduce more and more of mother tongue reading, could we see better results?
We definitely would. But we have, before we didn't have a lot of mother tongue language books. But in actual fact, we have them now. If we introduce mother tongue reading at an early stage, and it's not a complicated process, we would find that our children, in actual fact, people are more embarrassed to read in their own language. That everybody wants to read in a foreign language, let alone wanting to read in their own language. And for me, Naledi, the other basic is that the alphabet, before you even get to the step of reading, just knowing the alphabet should be at a grade 1 level. And yet we are meeting young people who actually cannot read, at that level. They actually are struggling with the alphabet.
Yeah.
So if you are at that level, at early childhood level, you cannot then jump a stage and go to grade 4 with statistics and get paralyzed. We really have to go back to basics and start from grade 0 right up to grade 4 as a campaign, just to make sure. One of the basics in rural areas, we used to cut newspapers and form alphabets and words, because the formation of words is the art of reading. And those basics are not there in the classroom.
Yeah, just to wrap things before I let you go, 2 questions. What is it that parents should be doing? Because there's something to be said about the role of teachers in schools. But as a parent, when you hear that your child at the age of 10, in some cases even in grade 6, that's at the age of 12, is unable to read for meaning, that should be concerning. What is it that parents can do firstly? And then just to wrap up as we finish that thought and say, if we don't get this right, what are we looking at for the future of these children 10, 20 years from now?
The first thing is parents can start reading with their children. Just for a minute, switch off everything at home and just read. Even if any newspaper, any article, even an advert on a box of soap is enough the starting of your child's reading. Even if you are driving along with your child, reading signs is the beginning of saying to your child, what does that word say? And therefore parents can play a very vital role. Churches, if you allow young people to begin to read in the church and get proud of how they've read in their own mother tongue, we're beginning a process. Naledi, in closing, all I can say to you, illiteracy is too sad for words. What we will have is a disaster of young people or adults who are basically blind, because the understanding of not being able to read is equal to being blind. You actually cannot see.
Yeah.
You cannot feel, you cannot understand, you cannot play a role in your own. You are not a citizen, actually. You are deprived of any right, no banking, no signature. In actual fact, it paralyzes the individual completely.
Yeah, and of course it would have massive impacts on our economy as well moving forward. But just to go through those results, 81% of grade 4 learners were unable to read for meaning. That's according to the study that was conducted in 2021. I want to compare those numbers to what they look like in 2011. In 2011, those numbers were 82%, 78% in 2016. So we're not making progress. The work needs to continue. But Thandi, thank you so much for speaking to us and reminding us of the responsibility that we all really have to be playing there. Thandi Chaane, the Director of TsaRona Investment, of course, also the former Director of READ.